I'm here to explain what I do, I think, in the European Parliament. And the fact is that there are 73 MEPs elected from the UK to sit in that Parliament. It used to be 78, but at each five-yearly election, the European elections, it diminishes by a few because more and more countries enter the EU and there's a fixed number of seats. They're fixing it now at 750. It was 784, but they've decided under the Lisbon Treaty 750 is sufficient. So every 5 years we have an election, and now every 5 years less and less MEPs will go from this country to sit there. Now at the moment, because we've got 73 MEPs, we're less than 10%. In fact, we're closer to 8.5%, something like that, of the total. So when people tell you there's a big voice in Europe for us and we should be at the heart of Europe and we should influence Europe, think how difficult that might be if you've got less than 10% shout and when your economy is quite different to everybody else's. Even today we're told, aren't we, in the newspaper, that the EU have got something against our milk jugs. I mean, they do get into all of the various categories and ways of life and come down to the very small items, but apparently they don't like our milk jugs because they think they're not very hygienic. That might be because the continentals don't use soup spoons, as I've found out many times, but they also don't have many milk jugs because it's not their tradition having tea in a milk jug. They do their tea in a completely different way. In fact, if you ever order a cup of tea in the European Parliament, they give you a cup of hot water and a tea bag on the side, and you make it yourself. And it doesn't taste the same because it's lukewarm. But anyway, we've got all the problems there of being misunderstood. We've got all the problems of trying to make our voice heard. And we're not coming through because there aren't sufficient people from the UK representing us. This nation is still the sixth largest economy in the world by gross domestic product. We used to be the fourth. When I was elected in 2004, we were the fourth largest economy by gross domestic product. But since that time, the Chinese have overtaken us and are now in second place, almost equal with the Japanese, probably overtaking the Japanese as we speak because they keep going further up the table. And we've got the French, who also just got ahead of us. That's because of the euro-pound differential, and when the euro goes down, they'll probably sink to sixth and we'll take fifth. It's always been like that with the French for a long time. But if you look at our economy, it does depend by 80% in two aspects. First of all, 80% of our economy depends on small businesses. Small businesses are the heart and soul of this country, not the major large companies. You know, Cadbury's are going to be leaving us now and joining Kraft, so that's a very large company, and there's lots of auto manufacturers that are large companies, but 80% of our output in this country is really from the small companies, and they are hurt most by the legislation coming out of Brussels, because that red tape that comes out of Brussels is very difficult to swallow for people who haven't got many employees. And also, it doesn't help innovation. If people want to do things a different way, the regulations will sort of give you an incentive not to try, because the regulations are very specific. We have Napoleonic law on the continent, and it's designed really to control the person. That's the whole point of Napoleonic law. We don't want anybody to riot. We don't want anybody to fall out of the system and do something different because it might be wrong. Whereas our law is more open. It's freedom under the law that we believe in or have done. And so when somebody makes something, they don't tell you exactly how to make it. A Yorkshire pudding isn't made like that under a British directive. You're allowed to do it however you like. It can be as flat as a pancake if you want, or rise to the top of the oven if you like, as my mother used to do in Yorkshire, but never mind. So we're allowed to do it just as you feel you should do. But the Europeans think everything needs to be specific and organised, and you have to have a directive to comply with. So innovation is a difficult thing for them. I have lots of people writing to me saying I'm a small business and I'm trying to do this particular thing, but I can't do it because the EU regulations say that it can't be done in that way. The day before yesterday, it was a kit car manufacturer saying that he wanted to start a new way of doing things, but he couldn't because the regulations wouldn't allow. And really, he hadn't got the funding to attack the EU and get it all changed, and what was I going to do about it? The only way you can deal with people like that is to allow them more flexibility. I spoke last night and I told people about the fly trap that was invented in Worcester, and I'm going to have to bore you again with that because it's come to mind, because it's relevant. A guy came to me saying, I've invented a fly trap. And I thought, big deal, so what, you know? And he said, well, I can't continue with this because the EU regulations won't allow me to. And I thought that was highly unlikely. And he said, what's happened is this. I started to do this and I got my patents in place for America and India and the Far East because it catches all kinds of flies, including mosquitoes, and it was a good export winner. And he said, I was setting up in Worcester, and the main ingredient of the trap was pepper, very finely ground pepper, because the flies couldn't climb the walls of this thing. I don't know how it worked, but the principle was they couldn't climb the walls and they'd fall down because of the ground pepper sprayed on the walls, and somehow it caught them, and that was the end of the story. So he had an inspection from, presumably, inspectors from the DTI or whoever, and they said, right, you're making this fly trap. Have you had it tested? And he said, what for? Oh, you've got to have whatever's inside that fly trap tested. And he said, well, that's okay, it's pepper. It's ordinary ground pepper, the kind you have at tea time. And the guys in the shirts and ties that came round said, well, I'm sorry, but you've still got to have it tested. And he said, why? And they said, because under the EU regulations, if you put it in a fly trap, it's an insecticide. And you've got to have it tested. He said, it's not an insecticide, it's ground pepper. Don't care, you've got to get it tested. He said, how much will that cost? And they said £80,000. And he said, well, I don't know why I'm doing it here then in Worcester, because this fly trap is used in India and the Far East. I'm going to leave the country and I'm going to do it elsewhere. And he did. And that's how you apparently help people to start a new business or to do something different, just because regulation blocks you out when it isn't even sensible. And there's lots of these things. It's not as if it's just one thing.